Good morning, good evening, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the latest in our Diplomat webinar series. My name is Sebastian Strangio, the Diplomat's Southeast Asia editor. And on our agenda today is politics in Vietnam. In particular, the unusual flux that we are currently witnessing at the upper echelons of the Vietnamese state and the ruling Communist Party. Over the past few months, the normally placid surface of Vietnamese politics has been disturbed by a series of high-level personnel changes. In mid-January, the president, Nguyen Xuan Phuc, also the former prime minister, tendered his resignation after the party censured him for violations and wrongdoing by officials under his control. And two of these, the most prominent of these officials, were deputy prime ministers who resigned earlier in January as well. These resignations came following months of damaging revelations about two high-profile corruption scandals related to Vietnam's COVID-19 response. And one of the two deputy prime ministers was Pham Binh Minh, who served as Vietnam's foreign minister for a decade to 2021, so a very prominent figure as well. Now, the immediate context for all of this has been an anti-corruption campaign that is being waged by the Communist Party of Vietnam's General Secretary, Nguyen Phu Trong, who is now deep into his third term as party chief. And over the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen an increasing toll of party officials, government officials, and even private business people being arrested or expelled from the party or censored officially as part of this campaign. But behind this political and moral crusade, there are lurking persistent rumors of personal, political, and factional rivalries, which somewhat muddy the picture a little bit in terms of what's actually happening in Vietnam. And Vietnamese politics can often be very opaque, very difficult to see from the outside what is going on if one is not well informed. And I think it's also true that Vietnamese politics attracts a lot less international attention than other countries in the region, and certainly a lot less attention than it warrants, given the country's growing prominence as a middle power and its particular relation to the growing rivalry between China and the United States. So for our examination of what's happening in Vietnam, where the country might be going in the coming years, and how it might impact Vietnam's foreign policy and international standing, we are very privileged to be joined by 3 leading experts in the field. Our first speaker will be Linh Nguyen. Linh is a former Financial Times journalist who is based in several places in the region, I believe, and is now working as an associate director in the Southeast Asia business intelligence practice at Control Risks, a political risk consultancy based in Singapore. Our second panelist, and appearing, I think, for the second time in the Diplomat webinar series, is Dr. Zachary Abuza, a professor at the Naval War College in Washington, D.C., where he focuses on Southeast Asian politics and security issues writ large, with a particular focus on governance, democratization, human rights, armed insurgencies, and maritime security. Zach is the author of 4 books and is also a frequent commentator on regional politics, including for us here at the Diplomat. And rounding out our panel is Dr. Hong Nguyen, an honorary research fellow at the Center for Policy Futures at the University of Queensland here in Australia. His research focuses on a range of issues from international relations in the Indo-Pacific region to democratization and state-society relations in Vietnam. Like Zach, he is also a regular contributor to the Diplomat, so we're very happy to have him here with us. Before we get things kicked off, just a quick note on how we'll be structuring today's discussion. First off, I'll be inviting each of the 3 panelists to speak for a short time, about 10 minutes, on various aspects of the day's topic, at which point we will then move into a moderated discussion about various aspects of the questions before us. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Linh, the first of our 3 panelists, to offer us some initial thoughts on the recent changes in Vietnam. Linh, perhaps you could kick things off by giving us an overview of what's driving these changes, and to what extent this can all be put down to anti-corruption efforts.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Excuse me. As you exactly mentioned, the anti-corruption is the main driver of all these leadership reshuffle. But to what extent we can just say it's all about corruption. So, for example, the two deputy prime minister who stepped out, there was no specific reason for them when they stepped out. It was not because they had to take responsibility for any specific corruption cases. One of them was in charge of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was involved in a scandal of the rescue flight, which now arrested tens of people for that, but there was no specific allegation that he had to take responsibility for that. Another DPM who was in charge of Ministry of Health and other issues, which also the ministry was also involved in a giant scandal involving the inflated price for COVID test kit during the COVID period. But also there was no official charge for what he did within that ministry. So officially, we cannot say they was ousted for corruption. There was no specific reason for that. And on the president case, who also just stepped out, three of them stepped out just right before date in Vietnam. Official reason was just he voluntarily resigned. So we cannot say that he was outed for corruption either. But beyond the scene, we all know that they was part of the anti-corruption campaign, where unofficially they had to take responsibility for those corruption cases, also for the economy, what happened during COVID-19. The question is, why now and why them? Because when we look at corruptions in Vietnam, it's very rampant in Vietnam, as we all know. So if you really wanted to investigate into these issues, there are going to be a lot more people who have to take responsibility for this. So why them? Why not other people? So if in a cabinet that two DPM and one president who also was a former prime minister are in charge of corruption, then how about the current prime minister? Is he also have to be in charge of what his cabinet did? There's no answer for that for now. So I believe that a lot of that could go into the political infighting for this year midterm party congress. So as you follow Vietnam politics, they're going to have the midterm party congress this year, where normally the political infightings tend to be more intense, which is gonna go more intense in 2 years when they go to another party congress. And all the things are very opaque in Vietnam, as you mentioned earlier. We cannot say whether all of those people who were ousted belong to any specific factions and which challenge some of the current people, political power or position. That's why they was ousted. But with the people who replaced them, we can see that they are all pretty new faces, which tend to bring less challenges to the current powerful people in place who could be the number ones to raise for more senior position in the next party congress. That's what we can analyze for now. One of the faces that within people we just mentioned, one of the faces that I think we should pay more attention than other is DPM Chen Liu Quang, who is a brand new face in Vietnam politics. But his political career has been raised really rapidly, and very likely that he's going to be the standing deputy prime minister in Vietnam, which is #1 position to be the PM in the next couple of years. And with the current rumors about PM might be involved in some investigation as well. Personally, I don't really believe in that rumor, because from my experience following Vietnam politics, whenever a rumor is too strong and too consistent, it's not true. But keep that in mind. If anything happened to the current prime minister, either now or in a couple of years, DPM Chen Liu Quang is someone who's really gonna raise in power and someone who should follow closely.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ling. So now we'll pass it all the baton along to Hai. Hai, you wrote an interesting article for us recently that compared Vietnamese developments and some of these changes that we've seen with the consolidation of power that has taken place under Xi Jinping in China. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Do you think Vietnam is heading in a more starkly authoritarian direction, or are these changes in the outlook more complex?
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, I wrote the articles about core leadership, a position that one person holds absolute authorities in the systems. Now, to put in the context, this term was used by Võ Văn Thưởng, who was then the standing members of the CPC Secretariat, to describe the roles of CPV Secretary General Nguyen Phuc at the ceremony held to confer the party medal to Chong, marking his 53rd anniversaries of his joining the CPV. Yeah, and Thưởng has been recently, of course, as everyone knows, elected as the state president. So the reason for people rolling their eyes when Thưởng used the term core leadership for Chong is that Vietnam since Ho Chi Minh founded the CPV in 1930s, and during his era, as well as in the generations of the CPV leadership that follow Ho, has never placed absolute authority in one person or established one person as the core leader. Now, I just want to quickly provide a little bit of the background in China also, in order for the audience to better understanding of why the core leadership is important. Now, in China, the core leadership position was founded by the CPV since Mao Zedong era. And Mao Zedong was defined as the core leaders of the first generation of the CPC. Now, in China, the CPCs now is under the 5th generations of leadership, which Xi Jinping established as the core since 2016. The only period that CPC had no core leader is from 2002-2012 under Hu Jintao as the Secretary General. Now, the CPC core leader hold 3 positions: the party secretary or the party chairman, like Mao Zedong, or the state president and the chairman of the Central Military Commission. Mao was the party chairman, but not the state president. Deng Xiaoping was the chairman of the Central Military Commission, but neither the party secretary general nor the state president. Jiang Zemin held all 3 positions. Hu Jintao held all 3 positions, but not established as the core leader. Now, Xi Jinping is holding all 3 positions and established as the core leader, as I mentioned before. Now, back in the case of Vietnam, the CPV has always rejected personality cults. Perhaps Ho Chi Minh was an exception. He was venerated as the party chairman, but for me, I think he acted more like a spiritual leader of the communist revolutions during the wars. And the generations follow Ho Chi Minh from Lê Duẩn to Trường Trinh, very short time, to Nguyễn Văn Linh, Đỗ Mười, Lê Khả Phiêu, Nông Đức Mạnh, and now Nguyễn Phú Trọng. None of them held 3 positions, except Trọng, also for very short period of time after President Trần Đại Quang suddenly passed away in 2018. So Trọng was like a contemporary, temporary replacement for the state presidents. So, of course, during the periods 2018-2021, he was holding 3 positions: party secretary, the state president, and also, of course, the chairmen of the Central Military Commission. In Vietnam, we call it the secretaries of the Military Party Commission. So, in the context of Vietnam, I think it's very unusual when the core leadership term is used. And even Chong, he once said, putting powers in the hand of one person, that would be risky, and that person might abuse the power. So I think many people talk about the similarities of the Vietnamese political cultures and Chinese cultures, but I think this is one of the difference, I would say, between CPC and CPV. And I agree with Linh that between now and 2026, we need to pay attention to who is going to be put in power. So Thượng has been put in the presidency, and he's quite young, right? And he's now only 53 years old, and he might be in power for 10 or even 15 years. So back to the terms core leadership. In my article, I said in the futures, the CPV might not establish a core leadership, but with Thượng in the position as the president now, and he might be promoted to be the party boss in the next party congress. So with his capacity, with his in his young age, he might be given the opportunity to hold all three positions as well. Now, the discussion about one person holding three positions in Vietnam was back in 2008. That means it's not new, but I think in the Vietnamese political cultures now, it is the matters of who has the capacity, who has the ability, and who has the most trust to hold the three own position. So I think there might be Thượng is a good case to see and to follow. And now to the second question that Sebastian you asked, I don't think Vietnam is moving forward to be more extreme authoritarian regimes. And as I said, because Vietnamese political cultures has showed that that could be something not going to happen.
Okay, thank you, Hai. Very interesting. Now, Zach, you wrote recently about how this sudden instability or flux in Vietnam's normally fairly predictable political system could undermine its reputation as a welcoming destination for foreign investment. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on your argument here and how you think these relatively unprecedented changes of the last few months are being viewed in Washington. Do you anticipate U.S. policy toward Vietnam shifting in any significant way as a result of this? And I suppose the converse question for all of our panel is whether Vietnam's foreign policy is likely to change in any significant way, given that there's been such a purge of senior officials from the foreign ministry.
One of Vietnam's key selling points always has been this, that they present political stability, and especially when you think about China and kind of the exodus of corporations or their adoption of China +1 strategies as they're trying to diversify their supply chains. Vietnam offered a slightly less authoritarian, more predictable situation than Xi Jinping's China. So that clearly has been undermined with this very rapid turnover in leadership. And it's not completely unprecedented. During the 12th Politburo, 2 Politburo members lost their jobs, were expelled from the body. We now have that this time. It could continue. Look, Vietnam does have corruption. It's got a lot of corruption at multiple levels. And I think we have to understand that, on the one hand, there is a legitimate need of this state to go after corruption. And I think of it in multiple ways. The GDP of Vietnam between 2016 and 2021 went from 257 billion to 366 billion, a 42% increase. Foreign direct investment in that period of time went from 16 billion to $20 billion, a 25% increase. And in the past year alone, foreign direct investment increased by 40% more. So I often ask the question about the regulatory capacity of the state, the investigative capacity of the state to go after and track all that business. If you're the Ministry of Public Security or the State Bank of Vietnam, can you compete in the marketplace with one of the big four accounting firms for trying to attract forensic accountants and actually having the manpower to deal with this incredible influx of foreign investment that Linh can talk much more competently about than I can. So I think you have to understand that corruption is always going to be a problem there. But Linh raises a very important question. Why do they go after some people and not others? Is it just you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, or is it really politically motivated? And I think when you start to look at the limitations of personnel and resources, yes, it is very politicized who they go after. So that should make some countries concerned. Obviously, the United States would look to the sacking of Vu Doc Dam or Pham Binh Minh, two of the interlocutors that the Americans would most rely on, and people that truly deserve credit for Vietnam's very strong response to the COVID pandemic. Those two individuals are really probably more than anyone else responsible for Vietnam emerging from the pandemic in the strong economic position it's in. So they've done that really well. Now, we know the regime is very concerned about ongoing corruption, and I don't think that this is going to let up anytime soon. Just this week, when they announced at that special Politburo meeting with the new president, they also said that they have 3 new people being elevated to the Central Inspection Commission. So that's the senior most body on the that investigates senior level corruption. So this is not letting up. The other thing that we should also note is that the regime is quite insecure right now, and we can, I don't believe that there is a pro-China faction or a pro-American faction. It's just a very dumb way and very intellectually lazy way of looking at Vietnamese politics. Vietnamese leaders have 2 needs. They need foreign direct investment, and they need access to foreign markets for exports. That is the basis of their performance-based legitimacy. The other thing they need is to maintain the Communist Party's monopoly of power and fend off what they are often concerned about as colored revolutions. All leaders are somewhere on that continuum. They're just not one way or the other. They're on that continuum. And I think obviously the Americans might be concerned that 2 of the more moderate, pragmatic technocrats have been ousted. And that is a concern, but it's not going to lead to any fundamental change in US policy. Likewise, it's not going to lead to a change in Vietnamese foreign policy because, again, the country has those 2 competing interests. Vietnamese foreign policy is determined by the Politburo. It is a collective body. And that is something that we just shouldn't worry about. It doesn't mean that everything is always great. Obviously, the Americans have been trying to score a meeting or a telephone call with the General Secretary, Nguyen Phuc. That has not happened. The Americans have been a little upset about that since he had a 3-day visit to Beijing with 5 other Politburo members. But Vietnam's in a hard place. Look who their neighbor is, and China watches them like a hawk. Last point I probably should make is that one thing we are concerned or should be concerned about Vietnam is right now on the Politburo, 5 of the 17 members hail from the Ministry of Public Security. The Prime Minister was a former Lieutenant General from the Intelligence Service. Obviously, the Minister of Public Security is on that, but 3 others came out of the Ministry of Public Security. That is absolute institutional capture. And I think it really reflects some of the concern of the leadership I'm not really convinced it's a more ideological turn, but in terms of needing to maintain their monopoly of power, you definitely see it in the senior leadership. You know, you and I cover other countries in Southeast Asia, and, you know, we're often concerned and we watch for military dominance of politics or in the cabinets. In Vietnam, it's not the military. It's the Ministry of Public Security. And that is something that we do need to watch for, especially as we go through, as Ling was talking about, coming up to the midterm party Congress later this spring, and already the jockeying for position for the Congress in early 2026 is underfoot.
Thanks, Zach. I mean, one interesting thing to consider with regard to the position of the Ministry of Public Security is the fact that the Minister of Public Security, To Lam, who many people viewed as a potential replacement for Phuc after he resigned his post, was not granted that post. And according to some of the reporting, you know, he voluntarily withdrew his name from consideration for the post of the presidency. So, I wanted to open this up to the panel. You know, how do we view the choice of Tuong versus you know, in place of To Lam? Like, does this signify a concern within the upper ranks of the CPV about the particular weight being given to that ministry, or is this simply that he was viewed as the best person for the job? I don't know, Zach, if you want to have a crack at that first, and maybe we can move on to see Ling and Hai if they have anything to add.
I would, you know, to say that Dong was the best choice for the job is silly. I mean, he has absolutely no foreign policy experience whatsoever. None. So I'm not sure he was the best choice. To Lam definitely was interested in it simply because he will soon be term limited as the Minister of Public Security. His predecessor, Tran Dai Quang, actually tried to run the Ministry of Public Security out of the presidency. So To Lam definitely had something that he was aspiring to if he had to give up MPS. So that's one thing. The other point I would make is that the heads of the Ministry of Public Security or the secret police and authoritarian systems tend not to be the most loved individuals. They've got the goods on everyone. And it's really important to note, and again, I would welcome Ling's comments on this. There have been quite a few scandals that have touched the Ministry of Public Security. But when you control the investigative service and, you know, in large part the prosecutorial service, you really are able to deflect attention away. And To Lam was very, very good at getting attention off of him, off of his ministry, and weaponizing corruption investigation against rivals.
Right, and some of our, our audience may remember the incident in which a video was circulated of the minister dining on a gold-encrusted steak at a London restaurant that cost reputedly more than his monthly salary. And this is something that has not been subject to, at least into an investigation as far as we know. Ling, do you have anything to add about Tuong's selection as president and what that might signify about, the CPV's priorities?
Sure. First, I have to say, to me, Tuong's election is not a good news for himself. Normally, president is a position where people elevated there as a post-retirement position. That's a position where someone who's senior in the system, and like the last term before they resign, they was even selected as a president. That's the common norm in Vietnam. Things might change, as the Hai's mentioned. There might be some further development in the future. But for now, I see no indications that someone as a president could really got promoted any higher position in the system. Can you please name me one president who ever become party chief in Vietnam history? No. So if we just look at history, it's not a good news for him, for someone such a young age, whether he has to sit there for the next 2 terms and cannot climb any higher in the system. That's not good news for such a young politician, right? But again, things might change in Vietnam, which is very unpredictable at the moment. Another point I wanted to make is that president in Vietnam is purely a ceremonial position. What you do in that position is you go and meet leadership everywhere and in those major events everywhere, but you don't have power decision-making power, especially those relating to business and investment policies. So we might like overrate that position for now, I think. What is very challenging for Thương is that also because it's a face-showing position. Normally foreign partners, including foreign investor and governments, they prefer some familiar face, those they already knew, so they prefer continuities and stability. That's why Phuc served in that position very nicely, because he was in the system for 15 years. One of the person we expected could be successful as a president, which were DPM Phạm Bình Minh, who was also a foreign minister for a very long time. It's a very familiar face to all the foreign partners, but he also ousted. So for Thương, it's going to be very challenging for him, how he can stand out in those meetings, especially like this year, for example, the UN meetings or the APEC meeting in San Francisco later this year. That's going to be challenging for him. And he had to learn fast, because for someone who's spent whole career in the parties like him, this may be something pretty new for him, and he has to learn fast. So I think for Thương, I think he has a lot to learn for now, and being a president at such a young age might not be a good news for him. And talking about Tô Lâm, for him personally, I also think being an MPS minister, you can gather a lot more power than being a president. But being a president could be a nice position for him pre-retirement. That's why we talk about him being a candidate for that position. But not being a president is not the bad news for him, I think. Being a MPS minister, you really have power controlling a lot of land assets, also business involved decisions. So this is really a very flourish position to hold, and also maybe less attention from the public and scrutinized by the governments once you become higher in the system.
Thank you, Linh. We have one question from Rachel Cunningham, who asks, to what extent or how significant it is that Thương hails from the south of Vietnam. Did you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, happy to go first on that question. Yes, it's a very good point. Another reason I think that Thương as a president also really is, I don't think it's indicate anything further for him that whether he can climb up higher in the system, because normally in the norm in Vietnam, they wanted to have one candidate from the south in the top 4 pillar. And now that you have Thương, who is from the south and who's pretty young, so that you can block him there for 2 terms or 2.5 terms. That means you block all the other candidates from the south to raise to the top 4, which leave all the playing fields for northern people. So that might be part of the game here. Another point is that a president is, as I mentioned earlier, is a post-retirement position for many candidates. So that also block all the overage people from staying, or not overage, but like people who reaching retirement age, to who wanted to have another age extension term. That in the past you can argue that yeah, I reached my retirement age, but can I be president for another term? No, that's not an option now. So by having Thương in that position, number one, you block other southern candidates. Number two, you block all the other reaching age retirement candidates who wanted to stay for another term. I think it's a very smart move from Politburo or also from the party chief.
Interesting. Hai, I wonder if I might pass it to you and ask you, a bit another question about this sort of regional representation at the upper echelons of Vietnamese politics. Right now it seems from what Linh says that the officials from the north are really in a dominant position, and perhaps putting Thương, a southerner, into this ceremonial position is a way of sort of creating some token representation, but preventing the Southerners from making any more inroads. I was wondering if you could put this in historical context for us. You know, how has regional representation developed over time in Vietnam, and you know, yeah, where you know, why the Northerners are now so dominant in at the upper echelons of Vietnamese politics?
Thank you, Sebastian. Before I respond to that question, I just want to mention briefly a little bit about the impacts on foreign policy, if you don't mind, and also about the promotion of Thương as the president. So I think,
Sure.
yeah, I don't think any changes in the political systems or in the leadership structures in Vietnam has any impact on foreign policy. So foreign policy is another story, and foreign relations is another story. So we need to identify clearly and separate that two terms. So foreign policy adopted by the Central Committee, not by the Politburo, all right? So it adopted at the party Congress. So that means in terms of the majorities of views, and it is more important. And the Politburo just only in charge of the implementation of the foreign policy. Of course, in the process, the Politburo has the voice, but what I just want to emphasize here is that the foreign policy adopted by the Congress, that which is more important, and it represents more the voice of the party rather than by a group of people. Now, in terms of the promotion, so any changes to the foreign policy, it must come to the party Congress. Now, in terms of the promotion of Thương, I think I have different approaches to this issue. I think for me, from my point of view, it might be a positive side because of his age, young age, and I more importantly, I look at him as a training for a person to be a top leader. So look at the Vietnamese political cultures. For years, the people at the top position normally at very old age, right? But now he's a young age. So can we, think of that kind of a training for a young people to be a top leader in maybe 2 years or in 5 years? And as I said, he might be, rise up to the top leaders, top position, as for instance, the party secretary, or he might hold even concurrently the presidency and also the party secretary. We don't know. And remember, one of the important tasks of a party secretary is to select the position, the person who will replace him, or train the person to replace him. So now having the support from Chong, that means Chong might look at Thương as the future of the generations rather than putting him as a ceremonial position. Now, so I have very positive view in this one. And remember, Vietnam is now promoting Thương image. The first foreign relations or the first activities that he showed in the international arena is the reception of the Cambodian Deputy Prime Minister. And he also sent letters of condolences and sympathies to the Greece governments. So that is something like Vietnam or the CPV is preparing for Thương to be more, important and representing the countries in the international arena. And I think one important thing is that we need to follow what countries Thương is making his first official visit, which is also important too. Normally they will visit Laos and Cambodia and China, but China has not been on the list of the first visits of recent top leaders in Vietnam already. So so let's see. Anyway, now regard to the regional representation, I think for me, I don't think this is something we need to think about. I think whoever becomes the prime minister or the president, look at people often say the president normally comes from the South, but what about Trần Đại Quang? He's not from the South, right? And people often say the prime minister position is normally come from the South, actually, like Võ Văn Kiệt or Phan Văn Khải before. But now, Phạm Minh Chính is from the North, not from the South. So I think the most important thing is when we look at Vietnamese cultures, particularly from Đổi Mới, we should look at what they do rather than where they come from. I think that is something the party has changed, and that is something, as I said, they has adopted a more flexible, flexible approach in running the countries these days.
Thanks, Hai. It's very interesting. We've got a few questions from members of our audience related to economic development in Vietnam and the potential trajectory of this. In connection with this, I wanted to ask, a question perhaps for Zach to start with, about the nature of the anti-corruption drive. One of the things that seems striking to me about this campaign is that it has very obviously failed to deter large-scale graft. I mean, the two particular cases that we were referring to before related to Vietnam's COVID-19 response, were apparently involved high-ranking members of the foreign ministry, and these are and so why is it that such anti-corruption campaigns have failed to stop this high-level corruption? Is it simply, as you said before, that there's limited resources, or does this say something more profound about the structure and nature of the Vietnamese political system, and what sort of activities it incentivizes?
Yeah, corruption really is a huge problem. I talked to businessmen, and Linh would know this much better and really should weigh in on this, but they're inundated with corruption right now. They used to find it was very predictable coming from kind of the tax man during tax season. Now what I'm hearing is that it's coming from just every bloody corner. Everyone is out to get their take and get rich very quickly while the hot money is pouring into the country. What I always try to remind my students is there are 4 different levels of corruption to think about. There's kind of that routine transaction to get goods or services, get approvals. Obviously, in a country like Vietnam, where the state controls so many assets, access to capital, land, that is going to incentivize graft. Vietnam is trapped between the plan and the market. The state still has too much allocative power. You have money politics, the ability for really wealthy to influence policy making. Vietnam now has that. That used to be a Western problem, not a developing country problem. Vietnam has rent seeking because it has soft property rights. Everyone's kind of going after and trying to attach a rent to something. And finally, the 4th level, and luckily Vietnam's not there yet, is just in utter kleptocracy, whether it's the Suhartos, the Marcoses, or Najib Razak in Malaysia. Vietnam's not there yet, but there is some unexplained wealth. Corruption is a problem because there is a lot of money pouring into the country. It's got multiple levels of corruption. The security services, the state bank, prosecutorial services have limited resources. They have not been able to keep up with the growth of the economy. And the fact is, when a lot of people are getting away with it, it simply incentivizes more corruption. Finally, the fact is you don't have a free press in the country. And I'm not saying a free press would solve corruption. The Philippines has a free press and they have terrible corruption. But right now, what you find is that the media, when they are allowed to report on corruption, they are being given by party censors and they are told this is fair game. So they know they're being used for political purposes to take someone down. But that's what they can do. And that you cannot have real transparency in the government. There's very little accountability. Those are all recipes for corruption.
Linh, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think Zach mentions a very good point on media in Vietnam. And if you watch Vietnamese media over the past couple of months or half a year, you will see some indications that there might be some reactions from, let's say, the other side of the anti-corruption. It's not out of the blue that you see news about hospital lacking facilities, that they have to cancel thousands and thousands of operations per day. From someone I used to be a journalist and watching Vietnam media, that must be driven by some motivation when you see news like that. And it's not out of the blue you see news about crisis in real estate sector in Vietnam that's put millions of people that put like hundreds and thousands of projects got delayed, and millions of people now don't have a place to live. Like apartment that they bought, and now because of the delay, they don't have any roof to live. There must be some motivation behind these news. I mean, from the other side of the world, when you look into that, you could see that's normal. Of course, we have to report news, but even the highly controlled media in Vietnam, I believe their motivation behind these news, and which could indicate that there might be some reactions. People might reach the limit of the anti-corruption. It might damage the economy too much, that there might be some reaction to that. But to the question about how it could affect the economy, also investment sentiments, I work with foreign investors every day, and the sentiment I got from them is corruption in Vietnam today is not any less than 5 or 10 years ago. So the question is, yeah, we had anti-corruption for a very long time. What's happened? Why there's still corruption everywhere? Back to what we discussed very early today, that anti-corruption likely is being politicized as a tools of those politicians for some milestone and for some specific goal.
As it is, of course, in a much cruder manner in other countries in the region, such as Cambodia. We have a question here that relates to this from an anonymous attendee. This is directed at Zach, but other panelists, of course, can feel free to weigh in. The question is, for foreign investors, the main impact of these political events has been the paralysis of decision-making within line ministries. I'm assuming the question refers to the anti-corruption campaign, because there's been some reporting around this. But now that a new president is in place, do you expect these ministries to begin functioning normally again, or will the ongoing campaign continue to slow decision-making?
I'm going to let Ling kind of weigh in with her experience dealing with the foreign investors on the policy stasis within the bureaucracy.
Sure.
Look, a new president is not going to change that. The president has very limited powers. It's largely a ceremonial position. The office of the presidency in Vietnam is quite small. No control over the line ministries. I think the bigger question is, will there be an investigation into Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh? Some people, Ling, kind of saying, I'm not so sure about that. The rumors are just too steady. It could be coming from a political rival trying to weaken that figure, which could be absolutely correct. What I think we've seen in the couple years of his leadership, though, he's not the strongest leader. He's not been able to kind of whip the government cabinet into shape. They have not been online. And we've seen kind of in sector after sector, an inability to make really good decisions. And, Vietnam, it gets very lucky that you have this decoupling from China, kind of this frustration what Xi Jinping has done with the lockdowns during the pandemic. Vietnam benefits from the fact that you've had 2 coups in Thailand since 2006. I always joke that Prime Minister Prayut gets no credit for all the jobs he created in Vietnam. Malaysia had 4 prime ministers in a couple since 2020. So I mean, Vietnam's peer competitors have not helped themselves, and that's helped the money go to Vietnam. It's not that they've had brilliant policy making or brilliant policy implementation. They haven't. And we see that because of this anti-corruption campaign going on, a lot of people within the ministries that actually have to implement policies or make decisions are terrified. But I turn it to Linh.
I absolutely agree with you, Zach. The sentiment I got from business and environment is that a lot of fluctuation due to delay in decision making, due to the dysfunction of some ministries. But whether or not with everyone seem to be settled down now, I mean, all the position got filled in for now. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Whether or not they're going to be back and focus on business management, economy management, I honestly don't know. There's many factors weighing into this. Number one, because the fear of the blood, no one wanted to make decision, no one wanted to take responsibility, so they might just stay there and stay safe, don't make any major policy decisions at all, which very fluctuates there. But there also might be elements like pressure from the economy, as we all know that at the end of the day, those leaders, they need economic performance to justify their position. So if this year GDP gonna be less than 6%, of course they're in trouble. So they really still have to focus on economic management. So they might feel a lot of pressure from delays in everything and no motivation for the economic development. Then they might really have to change what they're doing. I really hope so, because there's a lot of pressure from everywhere in every single sector, from all the stakeholders. So I really hope that they will wake up and really feel the need of focusing on management rather than fighting against each other. Because if Vietnam doesn't catch the opportunities it has now, when other regional countries are like, let's say, less politically stable, then opportunity cost is going to be very large for the country.
Hi, do you have anything to add to that about, how this might all connect to Vietnam's longer term economic health?
Well, I agree with my two previous speakers that there is a frustrations of the speeds of making decisions in Vietnam. Particularly, I have the experience working with colleagues from the Ministry of Transport, for instance. The transport sector is one of the areas that in the past years that has exposed a lot of corruption cases. So everything seems stood still at the Ministry of in the transport sector. I agree with that, but also I agree with Linh that there is a high pressures on all the stakeholders, particularly when the government and the National Assembly already set height of the economic growth rate. So last year's is 8.3, and now is expected this year's 6.5 or 6.7. So I think it's still very high, and there is one very ironic approach that normally the executive side is doing economic, but now the party side is now encouraging and calling the executive side to take more bold steps in order to achieve the economic goals. So I think, but for me, it's on the way a good side. Whether it's and I think the increases of the pressures on the anti-corruption campaign, I think is on the way a good side, because it will bring change anyway. I have different approaches to many observers with regards to the anti-corruption campaign in Vietnam. I don't think, of course, within a generation, Vietnam's corruption rate will go down to zero or even to very low. Or at the moment, it's stand at I think 140 in the ranks of corruption, countries. But we don't expect that within 5 years it go down to 60 or 50 or even 30. But the thing is, the good side is that it will cultivate in the mind of the people, of the public, that corruption now is a trend, and the people in the systems can turn around and can cover own corruptions more and commit corruptions more, and that is the good side, and I think that will good change for society.
Thank you. Now we've got probably time for one more question. Hi, I might start with you on this. We have a question from Hunter Marston asking what our panelists make of rumors that Zhang notified Xi Jinping in China of these senior level changes before they happened. This was actually a subject of a bit of debate on Twitter earlier today. And I was wondering what you think the significance and implications of that are, and then our other panelists can potentially weigh in as well on that.
Well,
what does this say about, if true, what does it say about Vietnam's relationship with China?
Well, no one knows the answers except Mr. Zhang and his interpreters, of course. Even I talked to the China experts in Vietnam who have well connected with the people in the community in the loops, and they said, well, we don't know because it's very sensitive issue. So and it's I don't think that if it's come true, then it will be go on public. So I'm not saying no, I don't know. I can't say for certain about that one. But anyway, in terms of the Vietnam-China relations, I think yes, it's on the way good, and I think it's good for the countries, for both countries, for the regions as well, because and people know about the histories of relationship between China and Vietnam already, and people understand the sentiment of Vietnamese people to Chinese people and to China already. So, but in the interest of the two countries, I think it's on the way good to have good relationship between the two countries. But I just want to emphasize here is that, and that's one I mentioned well before in one of my articles elsewhere, that talking about good relationship with China now is more sensitive for Vietnamese leaders rather than talking about good relationship with American or Western countries.
Thanks, Hai. Zach, do you have anything to say about that?
Trong went to Beijing immediately following the Chinese 20th Congress. That was months ago in late October. I just cannot imagine that all of these personnel changes were already included within the Politburo and Central Committee. The General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam does not have the power that someone like Xi Jinping has. It is still a collective leadership. Yes, we have watched Nguyen Phuc try to eliminate some of his political rivals, some successfully. We've seen him try to make sure what happened at the 13th Congress a few years ago doesn't happen again, in that he cannot get his successor, hand-chosen successor, elected General Secretary, which is exactly what happened in January 2021. So I just don't see him getting, and no one is going to get Chinese approval. This is Vietnam. That's they're a proud, independent country.
Right, and I think one could, say fairly confidently that even if there was some formal, if he did tell Xi Jinping, these are the people I'm considering, it would not be a way of seeking permission from China. It would simply be part of the ritualistic relationship that exists between the two communist parties, and that, that must be probably seen in that regard. Ling, do you have anything to add on this question before we wind up proceedings for the day?
I agree with all of you on this. And remember, Vietnam is not a mini China. Vietnam is not a little brother of China. I really don't see any ground for that rumor.
Okay. Well, I think, our hour is come to a close, so I think we'll leave off proceedings there. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our three panelists for their insightful comments. And, we could probably have enough questions here that we could continue this conversation for quite some time. But yes, thank you, Ling and Zach and Hai. And to our audience, we will be posting this video on YouTube if you want to refer back to it or share it with anyone that you think might be interested. And as always, set your web browser to thediplomat.com for the Asia Pacific's most comprehensive coverage. And yes, we'll hopefully see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.